The tall, gangly thing?
Hello and welcome. Today I'm joined by caster extraordinaire. You may know him from a myriad of different games, TFT, Starcraft, Hearthstone. However you know him, he's still the same. It's Frodan. Frodan, how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Nick.
So before we start, for anyone who may not be super familiar with who you are, why don't you just go ahead first and tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Dan Cho. You can call me Frodan. I am known as an esports host and commentator for a multitude of games over the past decade, starting off most notably from Starcraft 2, dipping my toes in League of Legends, and then, of course, becoming a main Hearthstone commentator for, about 7 to 8 years, and now kind of exploring some of the Riot Games titles once more, like Valorant and Teamfight Tactics, which I assume is what you're going to be interviewing me about. I've also dipped my toes in a lot of different other genres as well. So for example, I've casted Smash Bros. Melee at EVO just a couple of years ago. And that's just like one of my side passions that I really love. So in general, I really love gaming. I love esports a lot. And that's just like what I do. But that's also what I do on the weekends. On Monday to Friday, what people may not really know as common knowledge is that I work as the Twitch Rivals community manager for Twitch, the company. So as much as I'm talent on the stage that you might see for these really fun big weekend events or online broadcasts, I also, work for the man, the big company, Twitch. I've been working there for 7 years, or it's my 7th year right now. And it's just been great to just like watch how the company's been growing since.
Now, you talked about it before. You did say we're probably going to be talking about TFT, and we will. But we're going to talk about casting. We're going to talk about TFT. But before we get there, something I actually want to ask you is about Frodan, not the caster, but Frodan, the competitor. Before you actually got into casting, was there ever a time where Frodan was actually an esports competitor?
Frodan was an aspiring esports competitor at one point. Back in the mid 2000s, my first foray into esports and competitive gaming was through Major League Gaming. And I was a big Halo fan. I loved playing Call of Duty. Modern Warfare 4 and Halo 2 in particular were like my games I really loved that carried over into the sequels. And, that's where I ended up competing in. And I remember watching on TV first. I remember thinking it was super cool, and I thought I was pretty good, right? Most people believe that they're the best kid on the block, and that's the truth. I was the best player in my block, but I was not the best, not even in my state, right? Let alone the national competition circuit in America. So I got a really big reality check when I went to my first couple events and just couldn't even get past like the third or fourth round of loser, or I got to losers round 5, I think, before I bombed out. So wasn't very good. And, just to put that in reference, that's barely better than half the field. So it was just overall a really, really weak performance for me. But, I got to see someone get to commentate Halo in front of a big audience and on TV. His name's Chris Puckett. He was the first person that showed me that talking over games can be a thing. And, being a person that loved public speech and debate and presentation and, having a little bit of theater experience as well, it just felt like a really natural transition. If there's anything that I love more than playing games, is being able to talk about it, about why I love it, and share my enthusiasm and passion, because I truly believe in what gaming can be and what esports can be, it being the competitive version of what the gaming community can put forth. And so I love that, and that's how I got my start into commentary, because I just didn't know that it was even possible, that it was a thing, and then I researched it more, and here I am.
All right, so as someone who went out at Losers Bracket Round 2 at MLG Raleigh for Halo 3, I'm just going to say cut yourself some slack, because Losers Round 5 sounds pretty impressive. But obviously, at some point in your story, you hung up the sticks and became a caster. So can you kind of talk a little bit about what your trajectory from player to caster looked like?
So from player to caster, it was pretty quick transition. So I stayed, competitive as a player going into StarCraft 2, and I signed up for my local collegiate competitive team in StarCraft 2 under CSL. That's what it's called, the Collegiate Star League. And over in that specific university, it was actually a really good team. They had players who they're not pro level, but we had players who could compete at the semi-pro level. And that's already just, in a game of StarCraft, there's just many levels. When you're just a little bit better than a player, you can just generally consistently beat them every single time, barring some cheese strategies or every now and then a mistake from a better player. I think that in this, again, I got a very big reality check for competitive games and I love it, but I also realized I wasn't good enough. But one thing that I had as an edge over everybody else on the team was a very high-end PC. I brought it to my college, and as a result, back then in 2009, 2010, not everybody could stream because it required a lot of different like programs. You needed like Adobe Flash Player, you need to have an audio program, you need to have the ability to have, to even stream onto the site with a good enough graphics card and CPU, like all the different things that like allowed me to be in a position to stream our practice sessions. And so what ended up happening is that people couldn't actually end up meeting up at the computer lab to say play at LAN, right? And like hang out and watch each other play. Back then, you were able to put on a stream for a cap of 50 viewers, I believe. It was like Ustream or some of these other websites that used to let you stream. And so I would be the streamer. Streamer had a different term entirely back then. I was the streamer for our team to put on the broadcast for our practice sessions and eventually our matches and different clan wars that would happen with my friends. So as I was putting on these streams, naturally you just start to add commentary and talk over it because it's like otherwise it's just watching games and that's it. There's nothing happening. I didn't have a good quality mic, so in the end, if you go back and watch some of them, it was terrible quality. It sounds like a lot like Tyler One's current mic. It's just a lot of peaking. It's low quality. It's like, what are you even saying half the time? But in hindsight, that was like my very, very, very beginning of commentating any kind of game. And then from there, like we were putting on the Clan Wars, I got invited to do that. And then I got invited to do online tournaments and I got invited to do local LANs. And then I got to do eventually like real events with actual pros. And then from there, you kind of can see what happened on broadcast because all the VODs are on the internet.
That's wild. I mean, it really is like a staircase, like from the very bottom that's just been slowly working your way up and up and up and up. And I want to transition back into TFT now because bouncing off what you're saying right now, something that was pretty wild was we had the regional finals and you got to cast from a live studio, which for many people was actually the first time they ever saw casters for TFT casting from a live studio. So before we talk about the games themselves, what was it like to actually cast TFT from a studio compared to at home?
Oh, Nick, it was really special, man. I love TFT so much. It's one of my favorite games ever. And it just also was compounded by two things. Of course, the first thing is the fact that it's the LCS studio. It's a legendary venue. So many big things have happened there. And it just felt like cool that I get to be added to that list of people who worked on that stage and on that show. It's just like really cool. And I didn't realize how cool it was until I was kind of there. I was like, oh, I secretly have always hoped that I would be able to work at this studio. But I never thought that I would because I didn't really think that I was ever going to cast like, Premier League of Legends in North America or do anything kind of even close to that. Just because that's not my game, that's not my scene. So in the back of my mind, it's always cool to think that you want to do that. Just like athletes want to play at a specific like stadium, for example.
Of course, yeah.
And then the second aspect is there's just this thing called the pandemic that's been happening for the past couple of years, and the fact that we're all separated. So get to see my friends that I haven't seen in years. I haven't seen like Admirable, who I've been casting with since 2013. I hadn't seen him in years, and it was just fantastic to be able to reconnect that human-to-human touch. And the fact that I hadn't worked in the studio, period, since the very beginning of the pandemic in 2020. So I was definitely worried about rust. There was some nervous jitters coming on, but once the lights started, turning on, the cameras were rolling, it was just instantaneous. I felt really back in my element, and I was just having the time of my life. And now I'm scared, if I can be very honest, because I don't think that I can go back to remote casting the same. I just now that I've gotten the taste of exactly what I was missing in terms of this component, I live for those moments, man. It's such a special kind of energy that can't really be explained unless you go through it yourself, but I'm trying to do my best to help you understand.
So, I mean, we're talking about how special it is. I'm sure something that didn't help make this moment so incredible was actually the quality of games. I mean, we saw Robin Songs actually put on this historic performance at regional finals, something that we may, frankly speaking, never see ever again. Of a player going 1-1, 1-5, 1-1 to dominate the field, take first place, qualify for Worlds. I mean, the stories are they write themselves. It's incredible. But obviously, you're someone who's very tightly connected to the TFT scene, and I want to know, compared to what actually happened, what were your predictions going into the event, and what are some of the thoughts you have coming out of the event?
Yeah, so in terms of predictions going into the event, the first thing that everyone was asking was, who are your three that are going to qualify? And I picked three. I picked Bertosaurus, who didn't go past day one, but honestly, he's a good pick. And he's always like one of those like dark horses that could really upset a lot of things. And a lot of players had him pretty high. My second was Pokigam, who came extremely close. He was just right there and almost has played better than some of the players who did qualify and wasn't able to get there. But, alas, we watched his VODs, and the man will come back with the vengeance at 6, I believe it. And my third player that I picked was Robin Songs, actually. And I feel really good about predicting it. I even said beforehand, I said it on the podcast, I said it, when I was hanging out on my stream, that Robin's story in TFT is just one of the coolest. It's very inspirational. It's very anime-like. People, our generation loves comparing things to, anime show arcs. Just like, the man quit his full-time job to pursue full-time TFT in an environment where everyone kind of mocks that. Everyone's like, why would you ever quit for a game that doesn't even have a competitive scene and try to go full-time into like streaming when it's like really hard to prove yourself in a game that doesn't even get like the biggest viewership, right? Like if you wanted to quit to be a Valorant player, I think a lot of people would understand, because at the very least, there's a lot of viewership behind it. And TFT is definitely like not a game that doesn't have a lot of viewership. There's certainly people who, of course, are popular on Twitch and other sites, but it's just difficult. So why would you do that? And he's just, time after time defying the odds. And it was just really, really cool. What a great weekend, man, just to be able to reflect about what happened. And to do it in a game where everyone says, it's just impossible to be consistent. And granted, there's a lot of things that, fortuitously fell into his lap, right? A lot of people would be able to take firsts in the position that he did, but would they be able to string them all together and do it in what is considered to be the highest stakes tournament yet, against the most difficult competition that's really developed in TFT thus far? It's just extremely impressive nonetheless.
Yeah, and with that said, we actually have the World Championships coming up, right? Talking about these high stakes tournaments, competitions, and we have 3 players from North America that are going to be sent to the World Championship against all the different regions of the world. So how do you actually feel about the quality of talent that we're sending? And is there any other region or any players from other regions that you have your eye on?
Yeah, so the quality of talent that we have in North America is the highest that we have so far. I think last set was a little bit more tricky to put our finger upon, because we did have Kurum and Mismatch Socks and DQA and Ramkev, but we didn't really understand how good Ramkev was until this set. So, the synergy wasn't really even there, because I think, those 4 players were kind of a little bit disconnected. Kurum's always been very individual on his own. Socks, as you know, his approach is unlike any other player, so therefore he's like kind of naturally by himself a little bit. And then DKOA's was from like the new fresh blood that's been rising up, so he's not like very acquainted with it. And then Ramkev's just like the unknown player at the time. This time around, the group cohesion is off the charts. Like we already put a group together, and there's already been thousands of messages posted. I wake up regularly, see 1K plus Discord notifications, because the players are theory crafting, they're practicing together, they're watching VODs, we're looking at profiles, we're analyzing what happened at other tournaments. So like North America is taking this very seriously. Like we really want to win Worlds, and while it's an individual based competition first, there's a lot of teamwork that's going into it. So my confidence is through the roof. I already think that all 3 players are very likely to make it to the final day of the competition, and all 3 are contenders to win the whole thing. In terms of who I'm looking at for other regions, I believe that there's no weak region there's no weak players from regions. At worst, you get a player that's like not nearly as consistent, right? People like to make fun of Esha from Oceania, for example, and say like, he's a meme streamer. He likes to cosplay and dress up and just make a bunch of jokes and basically dance for entertainment. And while he is, the fact that the worst thing you can say about his play is that he's like hard stuck 1K LP, it's like that still means that he's a good player, right? Like, is he an elite ladder player? No. But does he know how to conduct himself in tournaments? And obviously, yes. And Oceania had a winner take all. Like they only send 1 player, you have to win it. Like that's not easy at all. And that is reflective of a bunch of different regions as well. Like they had very, very cutthroat competition to get to this point. Standout players in particular, I think Shurikane from EU West is particularly noticeable. That player is very scary, and I think that he has a lot to offer. I think the 3 Korean players in general are very powerful. I think some players were comparing Dudu's run to Ramblin' a little bit, where Ramblin is a player in North America that has been very much crowned as like the best player to never make it to the big stage. And I think that, he's been always one round away. And if I recall correctly, Dudu was the same exact way. I hope I'm not mixing names up because I'm not super well tuned with like the Korean names itself. So those are like some players that I'm paying attention to in particular, but I would say that there's no weak region being represented at Worlds right now.
Yeah, I mean, we saw even at the last World Championship where the final day had so many different regions actually represented in that top 8. And, talking about the 3 players North America sending, for anyone who is watching, I don't know if you guys got to see the prediction video I put out, but I talked a little bit about it there where Robin and Spencer are so far ahead of the pack in tournament results that the only person who could rival the other person is the other person. And Milk, historically, probably the greatest ladder player TFT in North America has ever seen. So, I mean, there is a lot of confidence in these individuals going into the World Championships. Now, on this subject of competitive TFT, something that we heard months ago was that spectator mode is on the roadmap to be released sometime around the World Championship. We haven't quite heard an update recently, but as far as we can tell right now, still on the radar. So going into set 6, do you actually think that spectator mode could change the competitive landscape of TFT in a major way? And bouncing off of that, are there any other additions that you'd like to see the competitive scene of TFT add beyond what we're doing already?
Man, it's a pretty loaded question, but I hope so. I think that there's been so much discussion about the lack of features to support competitive viewership, right? Or like the competitive scene viewership and broadcasting side, that it almost feels like it's impossible to live up to. Like we talk about spectator mode, and I wonder if it's actually going to be what really helps take off on the TFT scene, or is it just doing more things like we saw this past weekend? Honestly, this past weekend or 2 weekends ago for regionals, whenever time is, I sometimes lose track of it. That was already like a broadcast in many people's eyes that legitimized TFT as an esport for them, right? Like they had been following along online, but watching the players, watching the in-houses leading up to it, watching the regionals broadcast play out the way it did, I don't think spectator mode would have changed anything of that. Maybe what in reality is just we need more investment from Riot and other people to really make it feel like it's not just this online cup that happens every now and then. Because that's what the feel was, right? It was just Giant Slayer does a great job with their productions. They put on these weekly Fight Night King of the Hill things that happen, and they put on Giant Slayer series. But regionals and the World Championship felt very similar in vibe to that. I do also feel that part of it has been TFT commentary hasn't really been truly explored for quite some time. And I'm just very grateful that I got to get involved when I did to start learning before the competitive scene really took off, because I started doing TFT commentary in set 2, but I would say that I was way weaker at the very beginning as TFT talent than I am now. And feel like some of the ways I've been able to categorize and study and analyze for myself has been really helpful to communicate these ideas on broadcast. And I'm just, very, very thankful that Riot took a chance on me, because it was very easy for them to just say, hey, you're a Hearthstone guy. You don't have to, you don't know anything about TFT, or, we don't want you to to come to our studios and do your thing. They could have just easily denied me and said, we want to grow our own talent. And they let an outsider come in, which felt really good.
Could you actually expand a little bit about how casting TFT compares to other games you've casted?
Yeah, I would love talking about it. Casting meta is some of the most interesting discussion to have, but it's very difficult because only a few people are even interested in talking about that. And it's usually full-time casters, and there's not many full-time TFT casters. I would actually say there's 0, but there's people who spend a lot of time on it. Like it's a very big part-time thing for me. In terms of how different it is, it's a new genre, Did we know how to cast Dota and League of Legends when MOBAs were first becoming really popular? I mean, if you look at the casting back then in season 1 of League versus season 11 that we're in right now, going to season 12, it's night and day. So it's something that it's definitely a developing and emerging category within the scene because at its core, TFT is actually quite similar to other battle royales and free for alls where you don't actually know exactly who's going to win. There's a lot of storylines being tied in, and there's a lot of chaos into it. And I feel that auto battlers are uniquely positioned within the genre to actually be a successful version of it because it's so much easier to do 8-player storylines versus the 60 in Apex because of the teams and the three players per team, or the 100 players that you can have in like any kind of big battle royale mode. So there's already that kind of dynamic. The second aspect of it is that compared to those games, though, there's less flashy moments that really make it easy for viewers to latch onto and understand. And so TFT, it goes one level deeper. You have to be able to follow these storylines, but you also have to be very deeply, intricately familiar with the meta and the players and the scene. And I think it's one of these games where casting TFT is very similar to playing TFT. The more you throw yourself and the more you're willing to commit to improving your knowledge and skills, the more rewarding it feels. Because I gotta tell you, man, I've done some really cool events and been on stages and part of moments that are legendary in the entire esports industry. But being able to cast TFT's first offline or like studio broadcast at the LCS studios is just one of my favorite memories of ever working in this space.
Yeah, one of the unique things about TFT is that there's a direct correlation between your knowledge and your skill. Whereas in a game of League of Legends, you could be the most knowledgeable player in the world and still be in silver, where in TFT, there's a clear road for you to travel as you learn about the game to improve and actually see your placements reflect that. And it sounds like casting is exactly the same, actually. So I don't want to keep it too long. So I'm going to cut to the last thing I want to talk to you about. You've obviously been in the scene, in the esports world for over a decade now, for quite a while. And I did some research. I found an interview back from 2012 you did with a player named Brightside on the Team Liquid forums. And I want to read you a quote that you actually said in this interview. You said, "Eventually, I want to be able to cast on world stage. Not necessarily GSL or something. That would be really awesome. But that's one of the unattainables that I don't think I'll ever be able to do. But I'd still love to. I want to be able to communicate on a global level. One day, I want to have my own platform to be able to speak about what esports means to me." Now, one of the most inspiring things that people can do is when you set your mind to something, you say, "I'm going to do it," you do it publicly, and then you actually achieve that. And I just want to tell you right now that, like, you are actually one of the most inspiring people in esports for that very reason, because you put yourself out there, you started from the bottom, and you climbed your way up to where you are now, and that's amazing. And obviously, this interview right now is not that global platform you're talking about, but you've done a great job of building up that platform that you said you wanted. And so I want to ask you right now, what does esports mean to you, and how has that meaning actually changed over the last 10 years?
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, I haven't gone back and read that interview since basically it got published. I think like maybe I went back to check it one time because it's actually quite funny because I do remember that interview for the reason you mentioned. Like it was like one of my first interviews I ever did in the space as like a esports talent, but specifically as a Starcraft 2 commentator. But also because I remember that someone asked me like who my favorite player was, and I mentioned Jeff In Control Robinson, and I'm a big fan of him. And he actually ended up commenting on that thread saying like, "Oh, that's like really awesome. Thank you for saying that." And then I eventually was able to I was lucky enough to actually be friends with Jeff, and I miss him dearly. And I wish nothing but the best for his family. And of course, Jeff, I'm always thinking about you, man. You're just like one of the coolest dudes I've ever met in the space. So thank you for bringing that up, man. I just like it's just fun to see like yourself a decade ago when you did that interview. What does esports mean to me? It's just everything. It's just I truly believe that gaming and esports is the future of competition. I believe that it's the screen is the great equalizer. It doesn't matter your age. It doesn't matter your gender, your ethnicity, your sexuality, your background. Like everybody theoretically has an equal chance. Now, of course, there's some extreme outliers. If it's a mechanical game that requires both hands and, you're for some reason unable to have access to that, yes, I get it. But, there's just something for everybody, and everybody is welcomed, as long as, of course, you make the space a lot safer for everybody else. If you're harming people, not. But all those things considered, gaming and esports is a space where they welcome people in. Open competitions, the fact that anybody can become a star, a new game, a fresh chance for you to reset yourself and start anew. It's just aspirational. It's like everything that people, if they want, they can make whatever they want for themselves. And I've seen people restart their careers. They were people who were like in finance and tech and decided they want to go into production instead because they love video and arts and media that way. I've seen people who were like lawyers and people who are studying doctorates end up becoming content creators and use that platform to promote mental health and awareness. Like there's a lot of things that you can do to try to inspire and touch and reach people. And most importantly, it connects people in other ways that are unattainable, right? Sports is a good comparison to that because, like a lot of times you get to travel to a place and meet people that you don't get to connect to otherwise. But I have friends from South Africa, from the Middle East, from places that like I would never have ever gotten an opportunity to connect to them otherwise. And so I believe gaming and esports is one way to actually unify humanity. Like I have a very grandiose approach to it, but like it's truly special to just be able to have people come up to me. I was doing an event, in the mid 2010s where there's people that were from, the Middle East that were like, hey, we love Hearthstone all the time. And like, this is the first event we ever attend. And they flew all the way to Europe just to come meet me and the players. And that's just so cool to see us be connected in that way. So in terms of like what esports means to me, it's like I just believe that it's one of the keys to really help us come to an understanding with each other. The week that Pokemon Go first launched was the closest thing we ever had to world peace. Imagine if we can have gaming and esports find a way to access that and tap into that source a little bit more often. And the esports side is what particularly excites me because I personally am a person that's obsessed with improvement and progression and just making sure that I'm working towards goals every day. And esports is like the pinnacle of that. People have already accomplished, the mountain that they set afoot to try to climb. And it's just really, really cool to watch people make their dreams come true. Like you said, a lot of times esports players are just like people who say they're going to do it and they do it. So right back at you, Nick. I love seeing that happen.
Dan, I want to encourage you after this at some point to actually go back and read that interview, because one of the things that's really cool hearing you talk about that is you're actually saying almost the same thing you said a decade ago. The thing that you said back then, really? Yeah, you talked about this same idea of esports being a way to reach people you never would have reached before. It's a way to unify humanity. It's a way to create a more even playing field. And it's incredible to see that despite how much has changed for you since then, that the core still remains. So it's incredible to hear it. And honestly, I
guess I didn't realize I said that back then in the interview.
It's really cool to see. And I'm just going to stop here because that is the perfect ending. I don't want to go any further, but Frodan, thank you so much for sitting down with me. Before we go, is there anything you wanted to shout out?
Yeah, of course. Shout out to you, Nick, for putting this all together. Honestly, there's a lot of people who get called as the pillars of the community, like people like myself or other streamers or Mort Dog and his dev team, and by all means they are. But also the real crux of like what's able to keep everything afloat are people like you, and being able to really dive in deep and try to find out try to unearth the coolest parts of the community and shine light to it. So thank you for being able to put on this series. I watch all of them, starting from when you're interviewing Soju and all the way to now. Big shout out, of course, to Riot. I think that TFT is truly a game that will look back and just realize that was a big moment for the genre, for Riot Games, and for gaming as a whole. It was the first chance that Riot really took outside of League of Legends, and was it a smashing success? And shout out to the community. They really show me a lot of love time after time. And I'm a person that's kind of floated across many communities, and I can definitively say with confidence that TFT community is truly special. Like a lot of other communities get flack for all the things that they aren't, but TFT has a lot of things that really make gaming cool. They're very, welcoming and inclusive. They're very fun. They're hilarious. I truly believe the TFT scene is some of the funniest out there. Our memes are just straight up fire. It's just great. And I'm having the time of my life, and I can't wait to see where we go from here.
Yeah, it definitely is a special community that, it's a 1 in a million. It's a very, very special place for people like me, for people like you, and I appreciate the support, man. Seriously, that does mean a lot. So thank you, Frodan, so much for coming on here. For everyone who's watched this interview all the way through, appreciate the support. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed. For more TFT coverage and content, make sure you guys like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.